Well, I have 12:30, and we're supposed to get started on time. And when you're in competition with lunch, sometimes people trickle in a little later than usual, so we're going to get started here. Thank you for your time today. My name is Larry Beezer. I work for the Cisco Advanced Services Data Center and Cloud practice, where my primary focus is enterprise architecture and solutions architecture. Today's a little bit of both. Before we get started, I want to ask you to please do the session evaluations before you leave today. I know Cisco Live values them for shaping this event over time, and I look forward to seeing how I can improve my own work. So thank you in advance for taking the time for that. Oh, and also, if you don't mind, put the phasers on stun with your cell phones and the like. We're going to begin with some basic discussion about context and why it's important, some quick hits on efficiencies and ways to, I believe, pay for your company's investment in Cisco Live this year, maybe a couple of years, just through those quick hits. We'll dive into where some of the efficiency vectors are across the IT load and the data center mechanical, electrical, plumbing, the data center MEP gear. We're not going to really talk about point solutions, point architectures, because ours is an opportunistic business, and you can't just go out Monday morning and say, I'm going to do free air today. It's a nice, pretty day. You know, wait for the opportunity to come along. And so for that reason, it's more important for you to understand where to specify, what to pay attention to, and as a result also, I put this tear out together at the end of the deck, which has not just the stuff we're going to talk about today, but also a considerable amount of additional material so that when your opportunity presents itself, you have as much wood behind the arrow as we can possibly give you. It's an opportunistic business. We're going to talk about a couple of things for your energy management program that I think you ought to consider for inclusion, and then dive at the end to the heart of the matter, governance and governance framework, a couple of ideas that are new that you have not heard in this context before that I think is going to make a difference in how your organization does governance. My partner in crime, Chris Kelly, is our question manager today. Hopefully the question app is working so that if questions come to you through the session, you can fire that off and Chris will answer it. I'm going to try to make sure we have enough time at the end for some conversation question. There's a lot of material to get through, so why don't we get to it? You know, as an enterprise architect, your main job, it all begins with standing on that bridge between IT and the business unit, and you translate technobabble into business speak and back again, so you herd these cats down the road at the same time, the same pace, to the same destination. And you know, when you do that, the first thing you learn is that context is everything. Context shapes the value of your message, it shapes the willingness of your recipient to follow or support you, and it's important to talk about context as we talk about our energy programs. We know, for example, the gear that generates and distributes electricity in this country is aging, has known vulnerabilities, uses a protocol that doesn't play well with others as a rule. We know it's being replaced by this stuff called smart, which implies a new transparency, manageability. That's interesting for our context. In 2005, they said that data centers consume north of 1.2% of all the electricity available in the world, and that it was going to double by 2010. In fact, it did not. It went up by a third. The reason for that is twofold. One was the obvious 2008 financial meltdown. The more important reason for our context today is Moore's Law. By the middle end of the decade, we had gotten into dense virtualization, kicked the tires on early cloud constructs and the like. And by the end of the decade, we simply didn't need as much gear as they thought we would in 2005. And so we went up only a third. But most importantly, and will be important for all of our planning in the future, is Moore's Law. That's one reason, for example, why you don't keep end-of-life hardware around past end of life, because typically Moore's Law says the new gear is worth it. But what's our context, you know? In the data center, we look for our opportunities in the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, the MEP of the data center, and that's the obvious place to start. But that stuff exists solely for the purpose of supporting that IT load. The IT load, the system, data, the compute, the network, the storage systems. Now all that exists to support those technology-enabled business processes, those application ecosystems. So we have the MEP, we have the IT gear, we have the apps, and those apps exist for the business units, the end users. So when we approach our efficiencies in a data center, we have to understand that a data center is a system. It's a system of systems. And when we approach our analysis of opportunity and prioritization of opportunity, we need to do that in the framework of that system, irrespective of organizational boundaries. That's simply one more nail in the coffin of organizational silos. We need to drop the silo mentality. But what's our context? What's your context when you talk about energy management? Is it power or is it energy? Power, measured in kilowatts, comes through that big pipe outside the building, through the utility meter, and it ultimately ends up at the IT load. And that power has to be big, and that pipe has to be big enough to handle all those kilowatts that IT load is ever going to need at any one time. That is a CapEx problem, a CapEx question. Now, energy, time-bound, how many kilowatts did you consume in an hour? Ends up on your utility bill. Typically, unfortunately, goes to your real estate department and not to the people who design these systems and consume these systems, so there's no accountability for these systems. But that is an OpEx question, an OpEx problem. Context is everything. Is it power? Is it energy? CapEx or OpEx? As you explore your programs, be clear in this regard. Let's get into some things. I started at Westinghouse Defense in Baltimore. My first mainframe was a UNIVAC 1100. And this puppy is called a FastRAN 2, a storage device. Weighed 4,500 pounds, 6 feet long, needed special bracing under the floor just to get it in the door. If you needed 2 or 3 of these spooled up at once, you needed to have your in-house geophysicist advise you how to do that, because they had to be oriented just so to the rotation of the Earth in your data hall. That's complexity, huh? Now this is version 2. Version 1 never sold. Version 1 had this nasty habit of rolling itself, walking itself across the data hall floor because of the rotational forces of the drum inside. And of course we hate when that happens. The engineers added a second counter-rotating drum, stopped the walk, doubled the capacity, all for the love of 90 megabytes. 90 megabytes. Now, when I looked up the spec for this for today's talk, something jumped out at me. It did not tell me how much power to supply to a FastRAN 2, but it did tell me that a megabyte weighed 34 pounds. It's funny how metrics change over time. You know, what do we manage? What do we monitor? What do we measure is important. Fast forward to today. If this 1 terabyte solid-state drive was a FastRAN 2 architecture, it would weigh more than 8 Saturn V moon rockets and be over 13 miles long. And just for fun, if that 16 gig thumb drive in your pocket was a FastRAN 2 architecture, it would weigh more than 2,200 Priuses. That's a lot in your pocket. Back in the day, this was how you managed your IT load. Keyboard monitor was brand new. They were just transitioning at Westinghouse from punch card and paper tape to this. And of course, change is difficult, change is hard, change is painful. John shared my cube at the time. John was in charge of main OL, the main online transaction system on the UNIVAC. Under his desk, he had 5 big boxes, punch cards. And those punch cards were the backup from main OL. Now, reliability being what it was in the day, he had occasion to use it until that fateful day, and you know where this is going. He used it, came up the hall, the cards, the boxes ended up all over the floor. And if you've ever seen a deck like that, once they're out of order, never go back. John had to embrace change. John had to go to the new way of doing backup and recovery. Change is difficult. Does anybody, just a little party favor for you guys, next time you're at a party, does anybody know what a 7/8 punch is on an IBM multi-punch? Anybody know? What do you think? Do you know? 7/8 punch? What? It's an @ sign. If you do a 7/8 punch on an IBM multi-punch back in the day with punch cards, that is an @ sign. At whatever. Bring that up at a party, you'll be the head, right? Fast forward to today. How do we manage our systems? Much differently. Our systems have evolved such that they can be aggregated. They consume telemetry from below and they produce telemetry above. We manage our data hall, our IT deployment, our stuff as systems. And convergence of technology to convergence of systems has enabled this. Convergence is huge. Convergence is going on right now. Best practice, first one of the day. Be on the lookout for convergent opportunities. Rationale being, of course, to optimize our investment. Now, what does that mean? Concrete example. There is convergence going on right now in your data hall. There are telemetry streams springing up all over the place. It's in the generator, in the crack, in the lights, in the PDU, in the receptacles. And all these data streams, telemetry streams, speak IP protocol. So the OT guys who run this stuff are getting these management systems that consume these IP data streams, and they're trying to figure out how to manage their data hall. But guess what? They're finding out the IT ops guys have been consuming IP telemetry streams since there was IP telemetry streams. And their systems are built to consume and aggregate and manage. And further, because of our new constructs of, say, cloud, big data, all these huge, dense deployments, knowing what's going on in the critical data center infrastructure is becoming more and more relevant, more and more important. Right now in your shop, there's conversations going on between IT, OT. Convergence is real. Forrester, Gartner, Cisco, I believe this to be true. So when you get back Monday, if you're an IT guy, find your OT counterpart. If you're OT, find your IT. Get that conversation started. Aggregating, converging systems is critically important moving forward. First quick hit of the day. Every data center I do an assessment on, this is the first 20 minutes, half hour. Guaranteed that every shop I've been in produced enough low-hanging fruit it would pay for your company's investment in Cisco Live this year. Here's how it works. Now, Monday morning, you want to bring along with you a camera if they let you take pictures in your data hall. There's some very good, valid reasons why your security department does not want you to do that if you're in a certain kind of business. Check with them first. If they do, bring it. If not, bring something to take a note, okay, because you don't want to take notes here. So, Monday morning, you go down to the data hall, badge in, go into the door, stop for a minute, look around. Are the lights on nice and bright everywhere? If they are, you got a problem. You just paid for Cisco Live right there because they all need to be on sensors that says, okay, there's a human being here, he needs light. There's no human being here, IT load doesn't need light to work, guys. So that manages that part of the equation. So, okay, we'll assume for sake of argument that we have sensors in this data hall. They see us there, the lights go on. We look across the big white space. If it's a larger data hall, you'll have that long, big aisle that separates the rows of racks. They call it Broadway or Main Street, something like that. The eye is a great tool to use to find what doesn't belong. In a hard geometric field like a data hall, you're going to pick it out real quick. Where are the tiles not fitting right? What's discolored? Look at that crack over there by the end of the hot aisle. Are they discolored? Buckling in some fashion? Showing some kind of water damage? If so, take a picture, take a note. That paid for some of your Cisco Live. Is there a perf tile out in the middle of nowhere? The perf tile belongs only in front of a rack, nowhere else. I can't tell you how many data halls I've been in a big expanse of white space, and they got these perf tiles sitting there. Pop them, replace them with a solid, okay? You don't need to cool the great wide world. And if you have these large open spaces, don't be afraid to partition them off. Understand your growth. How much space are you going to need? Plan for that, wall off what you don't. You don't need to manage that space, okay? So we go over to this row. We're going to look down this row, and I see only the fronts of racks. And if I only see the fronts of racks, that is my coal aisle, right? Look at the aisle next to it. And I see only the backs of racks, and that makes it my hot aisle. There you go. Now, if I look down this row or that row and I see anything other than the fronts of racks or backs of racks, Take a picture, make a note. You paid for 2 Cisco Lives, okay? You do not want to have the exhaust of one rack feeding the intake of another. And Chris and I were at a place last year where this was part of the problem, okay? Now, rows need to be the same length, period, the end. Same length lined up. Same height, period, the end. Okay? This data hall is fine, so we'll go down this aisle, we'll look in this rack. We're in the cold aisle. It's locked. That's a good thing. And when you look in this rack, you see only the front face of the IT gear, or you see only the front of the blanking panels. There is no way for the air to bypass or mix. If you see anything other than that, take a picture, make a note. You're accumulating more Cisco Lives here. The cables, tight, tagged, and out of the way, out of the airflow. And trust me, I've seen these cabinets shouting, Medusa lives here, with all the cables and all this nonsense coming out. Geez, come on, man. Tag them, get them out of the way. Doesn't have to be that way. Cables obstruct airflow. You don't want the airflow obstructed. And it's a maintenance nightmare. It's nothing else. Now, when you look at the bottom of that rack, where the cables come up through the floor, there's any number of third-party products that'll let that cable up, but not the air. Not rocket science. Plug the hole. Looking down at that perf tile, is that the right airflow? Is it right position-wise in front of the rack? It's not under the rack, you know, sliding under there. You don't want it under there. You want it in front of the rack. Now, if you pop that tile, and we're going to pop that tile, and we're going to look down. If you can't get your head down there because of the spaghetti mess of cables, that's a whole Cisco Live right there. Get that stuff cleaned up and out of the way. It's obstructing the airflow, and it's impeding maintenance, and it's causing a problem. We're lucky today it's not down there. So you look down there for obstructions under the floor. You know, a legacy water pipe on a mainframe, whatever. If you have a mainframe and it's pipes down there, it is what it is. But to the best of our ability, we don't have obstructions down there. It's not trash or whatever. It's clean, it's straight. Put the tile back in the floor when you're done. Don't create holes for other people to fall into. Now in this hall, looking down this hot aisle, there's no isolation of that hot air coming out of that back of those racks. So what we want to do here, you can use something like that cheap, heavy plastic they use in grocery stores. Hang it up so all that hot air coming out of the backs of those racks go just up to the ceiling, plenum, and back. Okay? It doesn't have an opportunity to mix with the cold, doesn't have an opportunity to degrade the cooling of the data center. That's a good way to get started on the cheap. They make fabulous purpose-built enclosures, and those are great if you have the right sort of deployment. And you can then apply in those enclosures some maybe in-row cooling, some direct cooling kind of constructs in that enclosure that release some of the load from the rest of your data hall, save some more money, extend the life. That's all good. The purpose here is really just to control the airflow, control the circulation, get the IT gear cooled, nothing else. It's that simple. Guarantee you're going to find enough in your data hall, if you're an average data hall, to pay for Cisco Live this year. I was happy to see that this slide was in a couple of keynotes this year. I wasn't aware they were in there, and I was happy to see it. So you heard John Chambers talk about it, and Rob Lloyd talk about it, and I think Edzard did as well. And if you remember those conversations, they emphasize that there is transformational change happening from so many different vectors that today is an unusual point in time. And caught in the middle of this transformational change is the IT organization. Now, my take on this is a little different than those guys because I'm focusing right now just on the IT organization. We live in a time where legacy siloed organizations are still commonplace. Agility, velocity of change in siloed organizations is difficult, and we are losing as IT organizations traction with the business, and they're finding other places to go now that they can go to Amazon with a credit card and get some cloud. Let me go buy a package of cloud somewhere. And the bypassing shadow IT has turned into this exodus, if you will. It is imperative that IT organizations begin to change. And you're going to learn how to change through governance that is effective, governance that is not painful, and governance, my friends, is not management. Governance is something completely different, and we'll get to that later on. But the main message here is that change must happen in our organizations because there are real conversations happening today about whether or not we need a data center at all in 5 years. You've heard this in the news and the trades. I happen to believe that we do. We're going to have data centers. But the organizations that cling to silos, that cling to the old way of doing business for whatever reason they have, are going to be on the losing end of that equation. The ones who embrace change and organize themselves around a governance of change are going to find themselves not only in a better position organizationally, business-wise, but they may in fact grow over 5 years and be a true business partner. Change is painful, but change is necessary. Second quick hit, okay? This one is a little more value, but it takes a little more work. Two main vectors on this slide. The first is IP energy management. Kick the tires on that. Look around in your shop. What do you have that's generating or is capable of being managed by something that manages energy as an IP endpoint? Second, you already have the tool in your shop with Cisco EnergyWise. It's part of the OS. Now, I'm not going to get deep into EnergyWise. We're going to touch on it a bunch of places in this deck. There were some great presentations this year on EnergyWise. I encourage you to go out to Cisco 365 and catch them, because I'm just going to give you some really high-level brushes on it. But you already have the tool in your shop. It's a zero-cost kick-the-tire exercise, except for your time, of course. You got to get started on that. Get used to it. Understand what it can do, what it cannot do, and where is it going. It's important. And it's going to also help you, and we have a number of tools and ways to do this, for the second point on this slide being the energy audits, the consumption and utilization audits, regularly, quarterly, whatever makes sense in your shop, depending on your size and growth. Conduct audits of the IT loads so that you understand how much they're being utilized. Is it being as utilized as they said it was going to be? Is it growing as fast as they said they were going to be when they put it in? Is it faster, slower? Is it an opportunity for further density, consolidation, automation? Is it something that says, I got a red flag, I better figure out how to grow this puppy? Okay? Now, when you're doing that, you're going to get to the second piece of that puzzle, the zombie hunt. Okay? You're going to come across these servers that are sitting at idle, and they do nothing than sit at idle and chew up electricity. Maybe the app had been consolidated or migrated to cloud or whatever, but they forgot to turn off the lights when they left the room. This thing's still out there. That's one thing that we do really poorly in IT is decom. We really don't do that well. And so physical sprawl is turned into virtual sprawl as well. And your regular utilization audits are going to uncover zombies. Go on a zombie hunt and kill them. That's the lowest of the low-hanging fruit. At the worst, pull the plug and see who screams. I mean, you don't usually advocate doing that, but some people have talked about doing it. The important thing is go on that hunt. Get rid of that stuff. You really need to. Cisco opened a new data center in FY12. The reason I have this up here is that as an architect, I was happy to see the title, that it's a dual-purpose data center. Okay, they did a lot of nice things in terms of energy management, energy conservation, making it a green and all that. You can read the slide, it's an eye chart. But what I really liked about it as a DR solution, it is a full-bore non-production data center all the time until and unless a disaster is declared, in which case it suddenly becomes magically the production data center. And we've been talking about that in architecture for years, and it's been difficult to do. But technology has now enabled that to be reality, and I'm just happy to see Cisco had done it. And that's why that slide is in here. So dig into the IT gear, the servers first. Of all the energy consumers in a data hall, if you think your PUE is just an average, whatever, 161820, whatever, your IT gear is going to consume 40–45% of the energy coming in. And of that, the vast majority is going to be going to the servers. Okay, so we'll deal with the servers first. We'll get to the storage and we'll get to the network stuff as well. But there are constraints on our ability to architect and deploy these systems. There's government regulation and industry regulation, company mandate. You know, there's how many shops here? Their projects are funded by the business unit, and the business unit owns. Anybody have the business unit owns my gear? I feel sorry for you guys because you have so much stranded capacity, it must drive you nuts. And when I first got into data center consolidation work back my EDS days, that was the biggest battle to fight. How do you wrest that gear from their hands, you know, make it a shared resource? And that's a big problem, you know, and then they come at you with the cost reduction measures, would limit the tools you can use or limit your ability to select the best in breed or whatever. So these all act upon our ability to do the right thing and do the right job as it's defined. But there's still a lot of opportunity, still a lot of things we can do. Now, in this case, how do you procure equipment? How do you specify what to do? Is your standard build? And we're going to talk about that in the next slide or two, but understand that Moore's Law says that end-of-life hardware out the door. It is not saving you money to keep it. You can make more money. Your ROI is going to be the kicker. You're going to make it if you just adhere by end of life. The maintenance cost alone, the energy efficiency alone, that old gear is going to pay the freight. How we provision it. Does it really need to take 5-6 months to stand this stuff up? Remember, a business case was probably made to buy this stuff. And it said that it's going to return this value to the business on this life cycle. However, that business case probably didn't take into account that 6 months it's going to take you to stand it up in the first place, and that's all sunk money. So if you design your systems to be standard, to be, as best of our ability, standard, you know, to be automated and orchestrated, you can take that 6-month time down to an hour or 6, whatever works in your shop. Now, consolidation, we're good at. Virtualization, we're good at. Okay, you know, we have our problems with who owns the stuff in places. Is it, or is it not a shared resource? Do we have security constraints that say we can't, you know, go after this stuff? But understand too that you can virtualize PCI, for example, now. In certain cases, multi-tenancy is real and is effective if architected properly. Monitoring, is that really a cost-saving thing? Not really, but it's a great enabler. It's like the internet is the great enabler of cloud, of mobility, of all the rest of this stuff. You can't manage what you can't see. And so monitoring is on here because if you're not monitoring the right stuff and managing how you monitor it, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, then you're going to lose a lot of the efficiencies you can get. And finally, let's figure out how to decom. Figure out how to get the plug pulled on this stuff so that we understand that it's no longer in use. We're not just claiming we've created this efficiency with this brand new gear and we got this stuff out the door and this stuff, oh, we forgot to get it out the door, but don't look at the man behind the curtain, okay? Decom is as important as all the rest of those. So look inside the server and understand first that when it's idle, it takes at least half the power draw of max. The CPU is the big hitter, but understand too that CPU architecture has energy management features in it that oftentimes are disabled by default. There are other management systems that can tap into this and help put it into a sleep state, a lower state of power consumption. Approach that tooling. Memory can be specified according to its voltage envelope and storage characteristics. All these are opportunities, but at the end of the day, the thing needs to be doing useful work. If it's not doing useful work, then it's idle, and idle is a problem. If you have standard stacks, if you have the ability to automate, then you can automate and orchestrate the workload such that the thing is always busy. And when it's not busy, when it is idle, it's in a low power state waiting to be busy. Now, you look at this and you say, remove redundancy, are you crazy? You know, resiliency is everything, right? Now, I happen to agree with that. But there are cases where you have some test sandbox somewhere that You know, it's really not that important. If the thing goes down, it goes down. No, there's no real harm. Okay, so in that kind of a situation, yes, you can pull some of the extra power supply out. You can spec non-redundant, but the reason I like this slide is not for that. If you take a look at what Google does with their applications, they design their applications not just to be resilient, but to be aware of their environment, to be failure aware, and such that when the hardware dies under them, the work keeps flowing and no time is lost because of how they've architected their software. And by doing it that way, they can run their data centers much hotter than the rest of us can because they've built their stuff on commodity gear that they build themselves. They expect failure to happen. They're not afraid of failure. It's a normal course of life. And when you have data centers as huge as theirs, it's a feature, not a bug. So pay attention in this to the software development lifecycle and the governance of applications such that they become more aware of and tolerant of and ignoring failure and fault, because that's how you're going to get ahead, especially in the context of cloud. Was there something over there? Okay. Again, now we all know what consolidation means. We all know about virtualization. One thing we do almost as bad as decom is rationalization, because that means that we can't have our little snowflake of an application that's all ours. Do we really need 10 billing systems? Do we need 12 systems of redundancies over here, there, or wherever? The hardest part of doing rationalization is having the conversation in the first place of what we need functionally, what's required, and how do we get there. And that is done through adequate governance. And we're going to touch on that later on. I keep coming back to this point about governance, and it's really the root of how we're going to solve a lot of these problems, because we don't do governance very well either. It's misconstrued as a management paradigm, and it's not. But what we need to pay attention to are those four words: consolidate, rationalize, virtualize, and, for crying out loud, decom, okay? Pull the plug. Now the storage guys have understood that the growth in storage has been explosive for years, and it's only going to get more and more explosive, and they got to do something for their customer base that says, okay, you don't need quite as much as my product, because I know you're going to be buying it anyway. And this has been going on for years. The graph shows the cumulative value of aggregating these different conditions, RAID and thin provisioning and so forth, and the value of taking a holistic approach to your storage. Again, this speaks to standardization, because if you had standard data sets for test, for example, you can just snap clone, do your test, wipe the bits, go back home. If you have servers, though, and this is the big deal here, the best practice block there in the middle, there are valid cases, absolutely, that you do need direct attached storage. Big data is the obvious, of course, but there are workloads that do need direct attached storage. Having said that, most do not. And the ones that do are difficult to become mobile when they're virtualized, and they're highly complex to make them mobile. Should probably take a second look at virtualizing them, and you're not going to put them in cloud. But stateless servers, stateless SAN, boot from SAN, for example, it should be the standard. That's how you do business. We boot from SAN, you don't have direct attached storage as a rule. Yes, there are exceptions. Yes, they are valid. Absolutely. But the vast amount of workload, it's an 80-20 rule. 80% of this stuff does not need direct attached storage and should not be your standard, especially in the pizza box. Now, when they put EnergyWise, moving into the network, when they put EnergyWise together, the goals were, as you see, the network is the control plane, and the switches, routers are the arbiters. They're technology agnostic, and you need to build out an ecosystem of support so that it gets functional traction out in the great wide world, because there's more than the data center here. You have the office building as well. It's not just compute, it's not just storage, it's not just network. There's the lights, the heat, the whole BMS systems in the offices, okay? This is all part of what you need to have in mind as you think about energy management programs, and think about it holistically from an enterprise level. To get the business investment, it has to be more than just technology. It has to be technology helping make and or save significant revenues, significant expenses for the entire business in a holistic fashion. And EnergyWise is a one way that you can go after that, especially since that you can overlay the business context, report and manage on a business context. Now, I'm not going to get into all the dirty details of this. John Perello and friends have done that very well this week. Go catch the sessions. But the ability to put a business context on your program is going to help get it sold and funded, because now they understand, okay, this is when I can badge into the building, which is my next slide, the example, the favorite example, where you have somebody works a 5-day work week. I've been in IT all these years. I haven't seen a 5-day work week, but I hear they do out there somewhere. But the system knows that your gear is at this location. You've badged out, it powers down. You badge in, it comes alive. And you do that at scale, and pretty soon you're saving real money. Okay, so the network can be the extraordinary basis of value if you take a look at it. And take a look at it outside the data center. Take a look at things holistically. There's more than just compute. But, okay, let's get into the sticky stuff of the data hall, the MEP. The constraints are the same. You know, there's regulatory, there's industry, there's company mandates, there's cost reduction and such. But there's still a lot of value, a lot of savings to be had in the data hall, because you have maintenance cycles. If you have the luxury of being able to specify something new, think modular, because all this stuff operates when they sell you the efficiencies at full efficient. Well, the name of the game with a lot of this stuff, especially the MEP, is that you don't want it operating at full load. When it hits full load, you're nervous because you're at the wall. It's time to get more stuff, so that you're never going to get that full load capacity. And if you think modularly about it, then you can also mitigate that kind of load loss over time. Think economizing. You're not going to go out Monday morning and say, gee, it's a pretty day, let's go do free air. But it needs to be part of your equation. Economizer modes, you know, this stuff has a life cycle when it comes time to replenish. If you're building out, think about these sorts of things. The next slide is kind of interesting. We already talked about the air distribution in our first quick hit. That's critically important in managing this kind of stuff. But we did on this slide an overlay of the weather data, bin data for San Diego County with the parametric charts, and the color of the arrows tell you the amount of energy it takes to go in that direction. Not a lot of energy to warm it up, a lot of energy it takes to cool it down, and the change of humidity is middling, you know. But when we look at where we're going to site data centers, if we take a look at this economize potential, our hypothetical data center in San Diego can use free air 78% of the year. We ran these numbers ourselves and used the Green Grid, that's greengrid.org. They have a tool. Their numbers agreed with ours, which was pretty fortunate, I guess, or validating as well. But 78% of the year using free air cooling, that's a significant amount of change. Okay, so think about these kinds of things as you're siting data centers and thinking about growth, because it does matter.
Question.
Sir?
On their website, do they also have, do they have information about all parts of the country and other countries as well?
The weather bin data and stuff?
Just regarding the free air.
Yes, they do have material on that. The bin data is government. The U.S. government has a number of resources that will give you that data. It should be freely available. Yes, sir. So on this slide, best practices, if you have an average PUE data center, 2.0, 1.9, 2.2, whatever, you should absolutely do periodically a CFD analysis of your data hall. You know, the computational fluid analysis of your data hall, because that's going to tell you where your opportunities and strengths are. It's going to tell you where your problems are and how to focus what limited investments you can make specifically to the problem. And you're going to find if you do that regularly, you will see that continuous improvement. And if you're going to do PUE, do it regularly through the year, because PUE is a point in time. We talked about air path control, underfloor air dams. The ASHRAE limits on the set points of your data hall were broadened a few years ago. When you do your command and control in the data hall, you want to make sure that you apply those to the appropriate places of your command and control system. As you replace fans and pumps, go with variable speed that are manageable, because that's how you're going to economize over time. Monitor, optimize, manage baseline. Very simple. It's the way you do almost any kind of a hard stat metric.
On the cooling side?
Sir.
I guess it's maybe power and cooling. In terms of creating zones in your data center, high density zone, low density zone, what's your thought on that versus spreading it out?
So the question was about zoning in the data center. Is it best to zone or spread density? It's kind of our favorite answer. It depends. But at the end of the day, you have to take a look first at where the load is distributed. Do you have a lot of high density, or do you have a little bit of emerging high density? Are you early in the growth curve? You're halfway through. Is it dividable? Is it even something you can attack? Okay, if it's something that's really sticky to start separating out, they're not virtualized, for example. Ideally, they've already started to be virtualized, because that's a lot more mobile. You can migrate into a zone if it's virtual, a lot easier if you're physical. The nice thing about zoning for high density rather than spread density is that you can then apply other technologies to that high density zone and extend the life and the utility of the existing systems in the data hall, cooling in particular. Because inside these specialized enclosures we touched on earlier, you can then apply stuff like in-row cooling. You have the refrigerator racks, in the back rack. I just read something a few weeks ago that somebody now has a rack that's really an oil bathtub, that you put the whole system in the oil bath, because of course liquid is the best conductor of heat, right? Orders of magnitude more than air. So when you're going to zoned high density as opposed to spread, you can have that kind of flexibility, and ours is an opportunistic business. So we need to look at our opportunities. Spread density works if you have no budget, you have no way to deal with it other than spread it around. You do the best you can do, and that makes sense. But if you can get a good governance discussion going amongst the stakeholders so that you understand both where the growth is going to, what its consumption profile is going to look like, then they may be willing to invest in something that makes sense, because they'll understand it then. Okay, you can't just go with a blank argument. Context is everything. So, and we're going to touch on the governance. It's really something that's important. But yeah, it's a great question too, because there's some debate about it, and we don't want to descend into religious wars, but at the end of the day, we've got to do something, because virtualization has transient loads coming through. You have transient hotspots, and that used to never happen with physical, Physical was hot or it wasn't hot. But virtualization, as it's mobile, creates hotspots as it comes up and down, scales and goes down and all the rest. And as you get into down the road very shortly, follow the sun virtualization paradigms, they'll be coming from everywhere. So you got to think about the landing zone. You got to think about the facility itself. And we're going to talk about Domain 10 as a framework for this conversation, because the facility is Domain 1. It's a great question. So in terms of the electrical system, though, the same kinds of arguments apply as cooling. The life cycle of this equipment is long, and when you have maintenance cycles that you can actually attack it, you got to think about the kinds of load factors, distribution factors that apply to it in your data hall. Think about the other parts of the data hall, the lights, the generators, and redundancy and availability. There's a trade-off, because you have the need, for example, They say, I need 5 nines, I need 24/7 availability, can never go down. But oh, by the way, that's only this 6 racks worth of gear. So you're going to build a whole data hall for 6 racks worth of 5 nines? I don't think so. Think modular in this regard. Think modular and do that intelligent trade-off for these kinds of situations. You know, you divide and you approach it, as we said, modularly. Every rack should have a standard operating environment in your data hall, and should be instrumented the same and instrumented intelligently. And by intelligently, I mean able to be managed, monitored regularly, and reported upon. You need to target as best the load as you can on your ups. Use the most efficient ups as you can. You're going to have to understand it's never going to be fully loaded. It is what it is, but you need to baseline it and monitor it. Deploy sensors as appropriate, both in cooling and electric, so that you understand your benchmarks and understand how things change over time and understand where you need to apply management and best practices. Lighting, you know, Chris and I were in a data hall last year, and you'd be amazed. I mean, these old fluorescent lights put out a lot of heat. You're standing under that stuff, and you can break a sweat in the cold aisle. You need to look at a different way. There's fluorescent options, LED options. When it comes time for you to make your decision, opportunistically take a look at what the best solution is, but heat generation cannot be part of the equation for your solution. You're avoiding that. And talking about heat generation, you know, these standby generators need to be ready to fire off at a moment's notice. And these block heaters they use are going to consume a whole lot of energy, more so than the generators are going to produce. But you have all this waste heat coming out of the data hall. And when you're talking about efficiency metrics, PUE, for example, there's another metric, and you'll see it soon, that factors in this reuse of energy, using the waste heat. And you get credit for that in your reporting metric. Now, it's not commonly, I haven't seen it commonly reported, but it is something that's out there in the industry and approved as things are in that regard. But to use waste heat of the data center, use photovoltaic instead of these block heaters, take a look at what makes sense when the time comes for you to make these decisions. Talk to the vendor, see what else they have to offer you.
With customers you guys work with, are you seeing any move toward lighting that is IP addressable?
Yes. We are doing work. In fact, Chris is busy doing work in that regard for IP addressable. I understand we have some partners. Do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, so if you go over into the exhibitor area, go over to the Gillette booth, they're demonstrating various vendors' lighting platforms. One of them is Gillette. We have the ability today to manage that lighting. So if you wanted to IP enable the lighting platform, control that platform, manage the energy being consumed by that lighting, that's something that you can do via that platform.
Yes, a lot of good work going on.
Now, for the IP addressable, is most of it in the LED space?
It would, for the most part, yes. And practically speaking, in the traditional space, it doesn't make much sense. But in the LED space, increasingly, those lighting platforms are not only IP enabled, but also PoE or UPoE enabled at the same time. Literally getting power from the network to provide lighting.
Yeah.
Do they make a commercial product to pull the waste heat out of your external area to help warm your gen sets? I haven't heard that before. Interesting.
A commercial product.
How are they doing it, I guess? I'm just curious.
Mechanically, you can do it. There are some practicalities to it. You can take reject air and pull heat out of it, and you can create a recirculation loop. It can be implemented, but you wouldn't see it as a commercial product. It is something that would be mechanically implemented by a contractor on site.
Right.
It's basically like a heat exchanger.
Yeah, exactly.
Air to fluid.
Yeah, flat plate, 2 loops. Just put it, because you have that air side heat exchanger at the same time, just take the heat out of it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. And it's another way. There's a lot of right answers in the world, and you got to keep your mind open to another one. And speaking of a lot of right answers, we got a quick story here. This is actually a true story. Chris and I did last year. It's a story about consequences and not having decent governance and not having the right conversations at the right time. We went in as a result of what's called a cap case. It's one of those things where something goes horribly wrong and it's a great big fat hairy fire drill, and you parachute in and find out what happened, why, and how to fix it. And this was one of those situations where one fine July afternoon, on a rainy July afternoon, 70 plus power supplies failed in a single, from like noon to 4, thereabouts on prime shift. And they weren't all Cisco's, but a large part of them were Cisco's by virtue actually of where they were located on the data hall. And you know, it must have been a really exciting day in the data hall when you get that kind of stuff happening. They were reporting, they heard a pop like a cap gun and saw a puff of smoke, and that's not what you want to see in your data hall. So Chris and I went in, and what we're looking at here is part of a 3D model that we build as a part of these assessments so that we can communicate the root causes and some of the complexity visually. And what we're looking at here is just the air tunnel that was underneath the data hall. This was an early free air design. And when they built this free air design early on, a couple of things. It was architected by building architects, and they didn't have a lot of experience in what data centers needed, and the filtration reflected that. So they had inadequate. There were some areas of the data hall, of the air tunnel, that were unsealed concrete. And if you've ever been in the basement of a house on a fall, winter day and tried to heat and regulate the humidity down there, you know what kind of problems they were facing with that. They have 2 air tunnels. This is on the south side, and that's on the north. And I hit the wrong button. And when we looked at the south side, that one, see when it happens. The south side was heavily encrusted with this white powder deposit, and the north one really wasn't. A lot of other things were going on. They knew they had a contamination problem. We found that they had actually 4 vectors of contamination that were sodium-based, and in fact had done a deep cleaning of the data hall, including the underfloor spaces and the racks, about a month and a half prior to the failure event, which obviously had increased the amount of contamination that was airborne and brought into the IT gear. We'll do this the safe way this time. These red cylinders you see here, those used to be up on the north end. Those were part of a fire retardant system they had taken apart, and they were stored down there pending disposition to throw them away. But they were heavily encrusted, and if you notice, they're right in the blast of the air handlers. So that stream of air was either picking the stuff off of the tanks and bringing it into the data hall, or in other conditions, it was letting it grow. So it turned out that because of the various factors, there happened to be a sweet spot in the data hall on the southwest side, and that was where the sweet spot for the contamination and all, and that was where the failures all occurred. They had a problem in terms of the length of rows. They were not uniform. One back of rack was feeding the front of another. They had sensors deployed, but some were not operational, and the software was past end of life and could not be restored. In fact, the server it lived on had died, and they couldn't restore that the management software anymore. It's not their fault now. The ops guys, these were fabulous guys. These were as tight a ship as they could run with what they had, but it's consistently capital constrained in this business that they're in. And getting capital money is really, really tough in their business. And so because they couldn't get the conversations going in the right context with the right people, with the right span of control, nothing was done, or very little was done, to address the known deficiencies of the data center and the contamination of the data hall. And eventually, all these various factors that had to come together for this failure event to occur did indeed come together that fine July afternoon. And the moral of the story is that governance is your friend. The right conversation among the right stakeholders stakeholders is what has to happen, because they would have made the stakeholders, the people who actually allocate the capital funding, that would have fixed any number of these causal factors, which would have prevented the failure event to occur, could have been invested in, and they could have mitigated their way out of this situation. But governance is difficult, but governance is not management. One nice thing about the 2008 financial meltdown, if anything nice could be said about it, was that it did pique some interest in renewables, and that continues to accelerate today. The guidance we offer in this regard is, as you're doing site locations and as you're doing build-outs, that the renewable should be part of the equation. There's a lot of stories in the press about photovoltaics, various wind solutions, and so forth. The source of the energy is important for where you put your site. It's more than just the nickels and dimes of tax breaks, for example, not to minimize the importance of tax breaks and all the rest of that stuff, but where you get your energy matters, and that's the message. When I was doing this, I don't know if you guys know, Dr. John Coomey is a very prominent researcher in the energy management field, and he helped with the EPA report to Congress, for example. And he had a number of papers that I wanted to see, one in particular that this slide is drawn from. And I contacted him, and he offered me a dozen of his papers, including this one. Very approachable guy, and I do want to acknowledge his support and help in this prepping for this talk today. This paper was really interesting in its discussion not to assert a way to measure, not a brand new metric, here's my bright idea, guys, go run with it. It was his approach to how to measure. It was that you need to come up with metrics that matter to an organization who's going to then be measured and graded on its success or failure. You can't say, get your PUE in order, guys. It's like, okay, now what? You have a conversation that's organizationally aligned, that's actionable. And in Dr. Coomey's paper, he has it defined as OT and IT, strategic and tactical. And that makes sense, you know, for the day-to-day. You have the guys who take the long view, and the guys who need to make it happen today. But organizationally, the metrics they're graded on are metrics that they have control over, that they can action, and that is in their span of control. And so when you make your energy programs, don't just run with PUE, for example. Distill that down to actionable things that can be organizationally aligned. And by organizationally aligning them, people can then buy in, get ownership, and support the program, because people want to do well, they want to do good, but you have to let them and give them something tangible that organizationally they can get at. You know, if they're in OT, you know, in the BMS systems or what have you, don't make them responsible for something that's in compute, and vice versa. It doesn't make sense. Expose the metrics that matter. And that's really one of his big messages, that you need to measure what you want to manage. But more data is not better. The right data is better. The extensibility of the data is better. The way that you can consume it and scale it is what matters. But only what is important. And who decides what's important? It's not IT, sorry. It's the business, informed through the business governance piece of your governance framework. What they need IT to accomplish drives the metrics that you're going to be gathering. And then once you decide what, then manage it. Understand that you're going to scale it. Understand the limits of the scaling. That if it's so twisty and difficult to gather in the first place, you're not going global with this. And right now you have to think about that kind of a scaling factor. Know the limits of the data, know what it says, know how to normalize it for conditions that are appropriate to where it comes from, and manage it closely. If you're doing sensors, make sure they're calibrated and any kind of drift is accommodated. But you don't manage what you don't measure, well, measure what you need to manage and then manage how you measure it. It's kind of the story here. And of course, no talk would be complete without PUE, and there he is. But if you're going to do PUE, do it regularly. PUE is a point in time. It's affected by a number of things, including what the weather is today, according to what the business is today. So when you do that periodically and regularly at points across the year, then you have the ability to normalize it and understand what the PUE is telling you. And there's a ton of metrics. I mean, in the tear out, there's like 3 or 4 more pages of metrics that you can get down to the rack and the gear. I mean, why you would want to go down in the weeds that far, to me, there's bigger fish to fry, but some people need that. And so you got it in the tear out. But again, the top one gives you a way to get credit for the waste heat recycling. What you do with it after you're done with it matters. It's like the recycling bins all over the place here. We throw out a ton of waste heat in a data center. There's got to be a use for it. You got buildings cold in the winter, right? EnergyWise allows you to manage by policy. Apply those policies holistically in the enterprise. When you're doing your program, take it out of just the data center. It's time-bound events. There's event-driven things. There's typical office space stuff, and then there's, of course, the data center. All of these are places where policies can be applied. And so think of this when you're doing your energy program and putting it all together. Think as large as you can, because when you cast that large net and you're able to deliver on that large net, you're going to float all boats, and that's really what matters. So, my favorite topic, governance. Strategy is not, I'm going to be the biggest in the world, okay? Strategy first states where you are, what are your obstacles, what defined actions are you going to take according to what guiding principles, and how are you going to measure success? How do you know when you got there? A good strategy covers these bases. It's not good enough to say, I'm going to be the biggest producer of green widgets in the world. Doesn't work that way. What you're going to do to overcome the obstacle or obstacles that you've defined, according to the tenets and principles that you've defined, that get you to the current state, to the future state rather, that you've defined as a measurable outcome, that's a good strategy. That tells a story. And that's what your strategy needs to do. It needs to tell a story. Now, Gartner has a great definition of governance, and I really liked it. This was from one of their webinars that I caught a while back now. But it really makes the distinction here that governance is not management. Governance is a framework and process that informs decision-making, investment decision-making, and assures return to value. Okay? It's a framework and process. It is not management. Now, you say, we have a business case for everything we do. You don't want a business case for everything you do. I hate to inform you. You need a business case for the first thing you do. What's more important than business case from that point forward is relationships, relationship management between the governance organization and the development groups and the people who make these things appear. Because the relationship management is going to inform you, this is sufficiently similar to the business case I already have, and therefore, I don't need another business case. Or maybe the relationship manager tells you, well, this really is sufficiently different. It's got these aspects to it we need to consider. And so we do need a business case here. But you'll save a lot of money in terms of resource to create business case. You'll add a lot of velocity in terms of deploying solutions by making the distinction between the need for a business case and the need for a relationship. And that's why it's a process and a framework, okay? And like everything else, it has a life cycle. And the key to a life cycle of governance is its exception process. And that's almost counterintuitive. What do you mean, exception process? It means that the leading indicators of change, the leading indicator that you need to pay attention to something new coming along, is going to appear first with the group that says, I want to do something, and you're saying I can't or I shouldn't or whatever, and it's in your exception process. And so your exception process is your most valuable asset from a governance perspective, because that is your first leading indicator that change is happening in your organization and what form it's taking, from where it's coming, and who the stakeholders are going to be that you need to include. It's a life cycle. It's not a point in time. So, please, governance is not management. Domain 10. Developed by Cisco originally to jumpstart conversations around cloud, because cloud is a very complex, abstract kind of a topic and transformational in nature to most organizations. And most organizations who are siloed especially have trouble getting the right stakeholders to the table to have the right conversation, because cloud isn't your normal physical deployment. It's not your normal virtualization thing. There's a lot of moving parts here. It's highly automated. It has a portal and it has a service catalog, and I mean, a lot of these shops don't have a service portfolio, much less a service catalog, much less a way to charge back, show back, what have you. No way to wrap financials around it, no way to ensure security's in there and governed. So Domain 10 was first put together to have this conversation with the right context. And behind Domain 10, each domain has a capability matrix. And the capability matrix discusses the maturity level, if you will, of the organization. It's divided into 5 different layers, from legacy to public cloud enabled. And it exhibits the behaviors of an organization across those 5 levels of maturity. And I helped in the effort to develop and mature those capability matrix pages. And in doing so, you know, I'm a governance process guy. I saw this and I said, you know, this is a fabulous stakeholder decision matrix for transformational change. Because all data centers, all IT, business, need to orient to this Domain 10 concept if they're going to survive transformational change. Because this divides your organization into 10 different areas of concern that each may have a stakeholder. You don't need 10 stakeholders or 10 domains. Organizationally, ideally, you would have less than 10. If you have 20, you're in trouble because you're way too siloed. But what you need to do first is to understand, when you go back, check your org chart, what is the least number of stakeholders whose span of control includes these domains. It starts, of course, at the very base. You have the facility, it's the MEP, the physical server, network storage, converged infrastructure, all that stuff. And can this domain support this cloud or big data or other transformational change over time, not simply just today? And there's a capability matrix behind this that we can touch on. The second domain virtualizes all of that so that it becomes a resource pool. And then the third automates it, and the fourth, and so forth. So this is a way of getting your stakeholders at the table, first and foremost. And I will hope, and we'll use for the sake of example, that you have one stakeholder whose span of control is, in fact, that domain. I submit it's unlikely that that's the case, but for the sake of argument. When you go back, first thing you probably want to do, there was a great presentation this morning, and Eric Vogel, Rick Rumbaugh, Rich Plain, I believe, gave this morning at 8:30. See if you can catch that one, because they go into the dirty details of what this thing really means, and I'm trying to stay out of the weeds with energy-wise and Domain 10 and so forth. But when you get back, take a look at these capability matrix, download their deck, and it has all the 10 capabilities, and find yourself in there. Because when you talk about maturity of an organization, you cannot skip steps. You must become this before you become that, before you become that. It's kind of like in cloud. You must have infrastructure as a service before you can do platform as a service, before you can do software as a service, because they're additive. They build on each other. So saying, excuse me, when we talk about these things, we need to understand where we are in the maturity matrix so we can make informed decisions about what we're going to be investing in and what the trade-offs are going to have to be. And Domain 10 is a framework that can be adapted, adopted, overlaid. There are others. Here's two more. On the one side, we have the open group, TOGAF, which is my favorite, and that is Enterprise Architect, a framework which defines how to manage change. And that's really what enterprise architects do, is manage and enable change. And it's built as an overlay. Take what works, ditch what doesn't. Understand your organization. On the other side is Zacton. It's kind of like who does what to who. It's a taxonomy. What do you deliver? What do you get from this? What does it look like? There are a lot of frameworks out there. What you need to do is understand your own culture, understand what works in your culture, and then overlay what fits. Because you need to have focused, informed governance, having the right conversations with the right people at the right time, making the right decisions that they actually can have a span of control to action upon. So, this example is in the Domain 10 talk, and this is a great example when you're talking about standards, okay? Enterprise standards, we talk about all the time. You don't need 6 operating systems highly customized. You don't need 20 different message buses and all the rest. Well, you know, having that conversation with some people, it's like they don't understand, they don't get it. What do you mean? This is great. Southwest Airlines, when they began their business, they consciously landed on the 737 airframe. That was going to be the only airframe they were going to support, and that was the only airframe that they were going to have foreseeable future. Delta is an airline. You could substitute almost any airline. I use Delta in this one because I came across their airframe spec sheets on the web, and so I could also offer that spec sheet to validate number 20 that I'm using here. But almost any large airline with many airframes would do, because the difference here is that when Southwest has to look at parts depots, they need a single parts depot, one spec. Delta's got 20. That's 20 orders of magnitude more than Southwest. When Southwest cancels a flight, they don't have to worry about, does this pilot have certification on the substitute aircraft? Will this aircraft have the same configuration and seating as the substitute aircraft? Because by default, the answer to those things is yes. When Delta cancels a flight, chances are good that's no. That makes the delay longer, makes customers more unhappy. Standardization matters. And this is a great way to communicate it, I found, was that it lets them know in a way that, I mean, we all fly, and we've all been canceled and delayed and abused. When they argue, push back against the enterprise standards, give them this conversation. I think they'll start to clip in. Not everybody needs to be a snowflake. We're going to touch a little bit on the capability matrix, only because that really does define how you approach the governance, what really matters, how to find yourself. We call them this, you can call them whatever you feel like, but the facilities, the level 1, domain 1, looks something like this. And you can, not every statement is going to apply to you, of course, but most will. And you can easily find your organization in each of these capability matrices and understand where you are, where you've been, where you need to go, because you're not going to skip the next step. You got to figure out where you're investing. How do you invest properly? How do you focus your investment? And you focus your investment by understanding what the next step is and who I need to have the conversation with. Who's the other stakeholder that impacts me in this regard? And this will enable you to do that. And again, I'd encourage you to do that download from this morning's presentation. They always say you've got to tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, then tell them what told them. So this is my tell you what I told you slide. And we can now open up for questions. We have, I believe, about 10 minutes. Excuse me.
You mentioned DC power. I was pretty happy to see the UCS platform offer DC. That's what we work with. I'm a big fan of it. One big thing about the IT industry is doing enough. Do you see that trend changing?
It's an interesting conversation. It depends. In certain parts of the world, it probably will. But that kind of change when you go AC/DC, it's almost an unnatural act in some people. It's easier to get them to go to high voltage, go to 470, whatever, instead of go DC. And you have to have all your gear able to consume that power. Else it gets to be a pretty horrible expense. Is that what you found too?
Pretty much you said more or less it is a binary decision. So you either go AC or you go DC. If you go DC, is it going to be quote unquote HVDC or is it going to be straight line 48? So you have a lot of decision points. Ultimately, it's a decision based on the context of the equipment that you buy. And for some, they go hybrid. So that can be crazy expensive.
Yeah.
They go hybrid, it gets expensive. And for those organizations, they basically have a mixture of AC equipment, ACC equipment within their data center, and there are many ways to architect that. None of which are inexpensive, but all very pricey.
What are you guys seeing for a trend with fire suppression systems? Those data centers get past a certain size and stuff. Put in a gas-based system.
Fire suppression systems, you were saying?
Yeah.
Like where that's going?
Yeah. Are they doing them in all of the data centers?
I'm not sure I could answer that.
So there's really three different choices. Four if you want to get really into it. You can go wet pipe, dry pipe, gaseous or non-gaseous. If you go non-gaseous in a data center environment, generally speaking, not a very popular decision. It's one of the you use it once and it's really weird. You can go gaseous, but once you get past, let's say, a 53-foot container kind of size, it becomes extremely expensive. Not only expensive, expensive in testing, expensive in deployment, very impractical. So for a lot of organizations, especially when you get into the 1,000 square meter and above size range, you go dry pipe, and then you end up with on-fire respond methodologies, which is acceptable under FDA. It just sort of depends on the context. Generally, it's better to do that than it is to go and put a gaseous system in, but there's some contextual nuance to that. So there's some specific, I could definitely talk about this about.
Yeah, we're looking at building a new data center. We have a couple small ones now. We have two systems. That's not too bad because the room's half the size. But yeah.
There's some new technologies as well. There's a ton of new innovation, especially in the past 3 or 4 years in fire suppression control. So it depends on what you want to do, but there's a conversation we can have.
Yeah, if you have a card, you want to leave it with us, we'd be happy to get back with you. For sure.
One more. I'm not a fan of false words at all. One, we're in Montana. It's a seismic area. It's very
Right.
hard to mount racks. In my mind, just looking at it structurally to make them stable.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, cabling, I think that it's harder in our experience than interacting. So what I've done in a couple is tidal isolation, of course, but top. Have you seen big data centers do that also, or trying to do false?
Part of it depends on the gear you're deploying. If you have a mainframe, a lot of mainframes still require that underfloor for a variety of reasons. But a lot of shops are going to a solid floor. A couple of customers I've dealt with, I'm sure, Chris, you've seen them as well. The case for having raised floor is pretty weak nowadays as a general rule. And of course, the exceptions prove the rule. But there are a lot of ways to do efficient cooling and distribution and all the rest without a raised floor. In fact, our data centers don't have raised floor, the new ones. Yeah, the new ones don't. Yeah.
I'm biased personally. I came from Sun Microsystems before here, and we were 100% flat slab kind of architectural approach. But there are nuances. So, like I was just saying, there's some equipment you have to just because it forces either airflow or cabling from underneath. But outside of that, most of that here comes from two vendors. Outside of that, then you're pretty much open. And why
Right.
spend the money on a raised floor if you don't really need it?
Yeah.
So use the money to buy more Cisco gear.
There you go.
So for the new data center, how are you cooling that?
The new data center, it's, God,
Raleigh.
yeah.
So Raleigh is highly economized water. We have some air side as well, but it's very, very contextual. So most of what I'm working with a customer doing a consulting engagement. When we're looking at mechanical, it's going to be driven largely by the environmental conditions outside of the facility. I generally don't recommend purely air side because there are some dynamic challenges with that. You have to filter the air, you still have to move air constantly. It's easier to move water than it is air. It's a heck of a lot more efficient to do that on the water side. So if you can pull it off, go water side economization, but you can choose which type of water side economization based on the specific context. There's dry and wet options, much of the things you can do at that point. I've done projects where we literally integrated into a dam, for instance, and we're using turbines and just flow water and circulate water into the lake. There's a whole projects like that, but that's very specific to that particular geographic area. So if you're going through a site selection process, one of the first things you can ask is, do I network connectivity? It's a biggie, right? What's my energy cost, the source of energy, and then how do I get rid of my heat? Are there some opportunities there to take advantage of the local conditions? Or in some cases, there's one project in Europe where the data center was located next to a community center who just happened to need heated pools. It was a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So they use their waste heat to keep the local community happy.
Yep.
Are you starting to see a push for water-cooled racks? Cooling at the rack level?
Water, there's a thing about water in the data hall that operators, yeah, but the OT guys do that. Where are you going to run that pipe? It better be under the floor because I don't need a rain shower in my data hall. So, there's a lot of resistance to that, but it depends on what are we trying to accomplish and what's the goal. Is water the best? I mean, like the example I cited earlier with the oil-based bathtub approach is new. I don't know if it's going to get traction or not, but it seems to resonate and make sense. And again, ours is an opportunistic business, and when the time comes to make decisions, that's when you need to have some hard and fast analysis done. And I mean, this is the kind of stuff we do, Chris does, I do all the time to help make these decisions, to help make sure that these kinds of things you're thinking about also include the yeah, buts, and oh yeah, don't forget this kind of things.
The limit number is 25 kilowatts. If you're going to go above 25 kilowatts per rack, it makes increasing amount of sense to go water to the rack, whether it goes in the rack or interesting discussion right there.
Cold wall, whatever.
Exactly. There's a ton of technologies there. There are 100 vendors in that space that have different point solutions for it. Just at that point, there's two decisions around specifically what do you need and why, and then you can kind of parse out which just makes sense.
Roughly 25 kilowatts is fine.
Makes a lot of sense.
There's some little fuzziness.
Yeah.
Because at some point, when you start going into,
Mm-hmm.
And that point is when you almost go one rack to one rack. It becomes very inefficient space-wise, and that's usually your demarcation.
I mean, I don't like point solutions as a rule in a data hall because I got a global footprint and a point solution is one more complexity to manage. So I try to avoid it where I can. You know, it will make sense sometimes, the ROI is there, totally get it. But I don't like point solutions, just as a general rule. Yeah, and that's why.
Saw one where they were piping liquid coolant, it wasn't water, liquid coolant. And then they would take up 14 inches between each cabinet for the indoor cooling that just circulating around. There was plumbing all over. Back to your whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know it's gonna
Sooner or later, Murphy lives, right? Yeah. Oh, man. There's an opportunity to excel, right? Don't need that at all. So,
I'm
yes.
putting together a DCM system. Think about a custom solution, 2 temp sensors. Think about having 2 temperature sensors on each rack versus liquid intake 2 temps. Would you guys recommend that?
2?
It'd be better to have one up higher, one down lower, just in case you lose.
I would say maybe 3, do the midpoint too.
Yeah,